Have you ever wondered if the Bible mentions the origin of the Filipino people? Asia is a vast and ancient continent, home to civilizations whose stories stretch back long before recorded history. Among these cultures, the people of the Philippines stand out for their diversity, resilience, and unique identity. But what if this identity traces its roots back much further than most imagine? What if the origin of Filipinos is connected to some of the oldest lineages mentioned in the scriptures? Today, in another chapter of our series, The Origins of Peoples According to the Bible, we dive into one of the most requested topics on this channel, the biblical ancestry of the Filipino people. Before we begin, make sure to share this video, and subscribe, because what we are about to uncover may change the way you see the Philippines forever. The Philippines, officially the Republic of the Philippines, is an immense archipelago in Southeast Asia. More than 7,641 islands scattered across the western Pacific Ocean, forming a mosaic of cultures, languages, and ancient identities. Divided into three great regions, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, the Philippine Islands have always been a crossroads, a meeting point between East and Southeast Asia, Oceania, and even the ancient trade routes that connected the Middle East to Asia. Over thousands of years, countless peoples passed through or settled in the archipelago. Indigenous Negrito groups, Austronesian navigators, Indian and Malay influences, Chinese merchants, Arab and Islamic traders, and later, Spanish colonizers. Each wave left genetic and cultural marks. But according to biblical anthropology, there is something deeper here. These peoples are not random branches of humanity, but descendants of ancient patriarchs whose names appear in the book of Genesis. Long before the great civilizations emerged, the first known inhabitants of the Philippines were the Negritos, one of the most ancient human groups in Asia. Their migration predates recorded history. But biblically speaking, to whom do they trace their lineage? Many scholars classify these early populations as descendants of Ham, one of Noah's sons, specifically the branches associated with ancient dark-skinned peoples who inhabited Africa, Asia, and Oceania after the flood. This connection does not imply that Filipinos descend exclusively from Ham. Instead, it points to one of the layers of ancestry that, over time, blended with others. When the Negritos settled in the archipelago, they became the base, the first thread in a tapestry that would later intertwine with other biblical lineages. Thousands of years later, a second great migration transformed the Philippines forever, the arrival of the Austronesians. These expert sailors came from Taiwan and other regions of East Asia, navigating by stars, waves, and winds, long before nations and borders existed. According to the genealogies of Genesis 10, this group aligns with the descendants of Japheth, Noah's eldest son. Among Japheth's lineage, one ancestor stands out, Togarmah, the son of Gomer and grandson of Japheth. Ancient Hebrew traditions associate his descendants with the peoples who expanded across Siberia, East Asia, Central Asia, Oceania, and the Pacific Islands. Filipinos, like many Austronesian and Pacific peoples, carry physical features linked to this lineage: almond-shaped eyes, straight dark hair, and slightly lighter original skin tone compared to Hamitic tribes. These traits point strongly to Togarmah as one of the primary biblical ancestors of this hidden narrative. Filipino people, we begin to see connections that, at first glance, would slip past any ordinary reader. The story appears simple: lineages, ancient peoples, migrations, myths. But beneath the surface lies a continuous thread linking biblical texts, apocryphal writings, Indo-European legends, and archaeological records. When these pieces are placed side by side, they form a disturbing mosaic. It feels as though we are slowly opening an ancient chest that someone intentionally tried to keep locked for thousands of years. And the more we open this chest, the more we confront something that deeply troubled the ancient scribes: the true origin of certain European peoples. Not just where they lived or migrated, but who their earliest ancestors actually were. The Bible does not tell everything. In fact, it tells far less than it should. And when we compare it with other ancient sources, the picture becomes even more intriguing. It becomes impossible to shake the feeling that we're dealing with a buried secret. A secret that passed through emperors, priests, religious authorities, and even modern scholars, each leaving behind small traces, but never revealing everything openly. Because if they did, the world might understand that human history is not as linear or simple as it has been taught, and that certain lineages carry marks, traits, and narratives that trace back not only to the post-flood era, but to a time far more ancient. And here we touch a point that few dare to discuss: the link between the descendants of Japheth, especially Greek Indo-Europeans, Scythians, Indo-Aryans, and early northern tribes, and traditions that historians have long tried to separate artificially. But when we place these traditions next to one another, they form a pattern that is impossible to deny, a distant echo pointing back to the same ancestors, the same stories of sons of the heavens, of shining heroes, of beings who are not entirely human. This is a kind of topic that can destroy academic careers. And that is not an exaggeration. Just look at how many studies on Europe's prehistory are rewritten every decade, as if someone is constantly trying to adjust a narrative to fit a safe, politically acceptable mold. Yet when we examine the oldest sources, we find something entirely different. Peoples describing that they came from the east, descended from great men, carried with them the brightness of the heavens, and bore the blood of the first ones. And then comes the uncomfortable question: why are these descriptions so similar to the biblical accounts of the Watchers, the sons of God, the beings who descended before the flood? Is it coincidence? Collective imagination? Or could these Greek, Norse, Persian, and Celtic myths be distorted memories of something that truly happened at the dawn of humanity? When analyzed without prejudice, the connection becomes impossible to ignore. And this leads us to the most delicate point: the relationship between these ancient European peoples and traditions that have been filtered, censored, and in many cases erased over the centuries. Not because they were irrelevant, but because they revealed too much. They revealed origins, lineages, mixtures that religious authorities believed could destabilize the official narrative. And when an ancient text reveals more than it should, it usually disappears, or is labeled heresy, or simply removed from the final version that reaches the public. Now imagine that happening not to a text, but to an entire ancestry. This is exactly where the investigation changes everything. Because understanding the true origin of these peoples means understanding what really happened in the earliest chapters of human history. Chapters that were edited, reshaped, and reorganized to protect certain truths that remain hidden between the lines even today. And it is precisely here, on this frontier between myth and reality, between scripture and archaeology, that the forbidden secret begins to surface. A secret that reveals not only who the forgotten ancestors of Europe were, but why their story was deliberately silenced. When the Spanish arrived in the 1500s, they encountered not an isolated people, but a flourishing mosaic of kingdoms, rajas, datas, sultanates, and trade ports connected to China, India, Arabia, and the Malay world. Spanish rule, which lasted more than 300 years, added another layer to the Filipino identity. Genetic studies today show an astonishing mix: 53% Southeast Asian and Oceanian, 36% East Asian, 5% Southern European, 3% South Asian, and 2% Native American through Spanish America. The Philippines is truly a genetic crossroads. Yet even after all these influences, the biblical foundation remains the same. The Filipino people descend primarily from the Garma and from the early Hamitic tribes who settled in Asia after the flood. The name Philippines itself came much later. The archipelago has been known by many names throughout history: Islas del Poniente, the islands of the West; Islas de San Lazaro, given by Magellan; Filipinas, named by the Spanish to honor Prince Philip. But while the name changed through time, the people themselves carried an identity far older than any empire that claimed the islands. Their roots go back not to kingdoms or colonizers, but to the early movements of humanity, recorded briefly in scripture and traced by archaeology and genetics. Based on Genesis 10 and historical evidence, the origin of the Filipino people can be summarized simply: they descend from Japheth through Gomer and Tagarma. They carry influence from Ham through ancient dark-skinned tribes, and they're the result of a profound blend between these two biblical branches. This means Filipinos descend from two patriarchs. Their traits reflect this dual origin, and their history fulfills the prophecy that Japheth descendants would spread across the coastlands. And the Philippine archipelago is one of the most literal fulfillments of that verse. The Filipino people carry an ancestry older than empires, older than nations, and older than history itself. A lineage that began with Noah, continued through Japheth and Ham, and expanded across the vast waters of the Pacific. If you are Filipino, your roots reach all the way back to the earliest chapters of the scriptures, to a story written long before the Philippines even had a name. If you found this video fascinating, leave a like to support the channel, and comment below if you have Filipino ancestry or know someone who does. God bless you, and see you in the next episode of The Origins of Peoples According to the Bible.